Hi, everyone. Lauren Gouin is here to talk about her book, Chasing Shadows, a poetry collection navigating the pathways of life, diving into universal themes of love, heartbreak, pain, hope, and rebirth. Before we get started, here's the inside scoop on the author. Lauren Gouin is a Canadian poet, screenwriter, director for TV and film, script editor, and storytelling consultant. Her poetry uses rhythm and rhyme to narrate her innermost contemplations. You can learn more about Lauren Gouin and her work at laurengouin.com. Well, hi, Lauren. Welcome to Inside Scoop Live.
Thank you so much for having me.
Absolutely. Let's talk about your book. What is Chasing Shadows about, and what was your inspiration behind writing this collection?
So it's a fairly autobiographical depiction of someone navigating the different ways that we can experience loss and heartache, be it through relationships or friendships or personal identities or ideas of others and kind of social conditioning. And then the turbulence of relearning yourself that comes after that. The inspiration came really from my own experience about 6 years ago when I was living and working in London, England. I was a digital marketing consultant in a very different field, and I was quite disassociated from life, like very closed off emotionally. Kind of the sheer idea of being vulnerable with anyone was quite terrifying.
Mm.
And then I had my first real heartbreak, one that like really knocked me sideways. And then a month after that, I got this mysterious illness that no one could diagnose, and I was quite physically sick. So I had to move back to Canada, and that really started this motion of re-examining my life's direction. And I began this very self-reflective journey, which definitely took me a minute to get through. There were varying degrees of awareness throughout the last 6 years. But it really started something that was quite incredibly confusing at the time and difficult and scary, to put it simply,
Mm-hmm.
ended up becoming one of the greatest catalysts to actually like living my life, which sounds cliche, but it's so true. And so the poetry actually really helped me to channel what I was feeling into words and to make sense of what I was experiencing. And I've always been someone who like thinks in abstract images, so the poetry really helps me to put words to that and compartmentalize what I'm thinking and feeling.
Yeah, I was going to ask you, have you written before? Because to me, poetry would be harder, but I guess, like you said, it just depends on how you think.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so I'm a writer, I'm a screenwriter. In the time when I moved back to Canada, I had about 6 months where I was quite sick. And then coming out of that, I had to quit my job and look at what I wanted to do. And so actually went back to school for screenwriting, specifically at the Vancouver Film School. They have a
Mm.
very niche screenwriting program here. So I did that for a year and then I moved into the film industry. So I was working as a writer, and then the pandemic happened, and that kind of jolted me in a different direction because no one had work.
Right,
Uh,
right.
yeah. So that became this moment where I had no work. I had to exercise the writing muscle. And I actually did an Instagram live workshop with Rupi Kaur. I don't know if you're familiar with her work. She's this amazing Canadian poet. But I did that. And then after that, I just started writing poetry as a way to exercise that writing muscle and
Mm.
keep that artistic flow within me because scripts felt so trivial at that time in the beginning of the pandemic. It just felt weird to try and create some larger story. So that's a very long way of answering your question.
I feel like the pandemic really jump-started a lot of new books.
Totally.
Um, yeah, because everyone had time to write all of a sudden, so it was
Yeah.
kind of nice.
Yeah, in many ways, it was a fundamental psychological shift,
Yeah,
culturally,
yeah,
socially.
yeah. Did the backdrop of the pandemic shape any of the themes or emotions in your poetry?
Well, yes, massively. I mean, there was so much stillness suddenly, and there was this like utter chaos in the air, but at the same time, the world was wildly still.
Hmm.
So, in many ways, I actually found that quite similar to how heartache and loss feels and kind of functions,
Mm,
where there's this really internal aching and physical discomfort and pain that we don't want to feel sometimes, but you can't control the world around you. You have no control. So there's such an interesting dynamic that begins to play. So in that stillness, there wasn't really anything to do, like we were just saying, but look at what I was feeling, what I was thinking, how I was feeling it, what I was believing and understanding. And so the process of that is kind of never easy, and it can feel like physically draining when you're processing what is going on for you and you've never had so much time to think about it. So I found myself with nothing to do but feel these things and look in mirrors that I couldn't ignore because I literally had nowhere to go. Um,
right.
regardless of whether I wanted to, like run, no one was leaving their house. So there's this energy of being forced to simply observe the world around you and within you.
Yeah. I love that you took that time to look inside and dig deep and write a book though. I mean, that's amazing. I mean, so many people I feel like, well, of course, so many people were just trying to survive and we all were, but um,
Totally. I mean,
you
I
know,
didn't I didn't come in with the intention of like, I'm going to write a book. It
mm,
was very much that I started writing the poetry just as a function of work and then helping me compartmentalize these emotions. And then
mhm.
after about 6 months, I was thinking to myself, like, why don't I put this out there? This is a part of my work. I like what I'm doing. I might as well just put it out into the world a bit. So I started by putting it on my personal Instagram. I didn't go directly to a publisher, but it was about 3 years of me posting and sharing. Then I didn't even write poems for about a year, and came back to it and was looking at this collection and really wanted to honor the process that I had gone through in writing them.
Yeah. You've kind of had some time to kind of get used to putting yourself out there through your Instagram posts, but what
Mm.
was it like? Was it any different when the book came out, like sharing that with people you knew or didn't know or
Um, yeah, I mean, it was that same feeling. I remember when I first put that first poem on, like it feels so vulnerable. You have no
Mm.
idea how people are going to receive what you're putting into the world. And as much as you can be like, don't care, of course, you're like, well, this is a part of me. And so, yeah, putting the book into the world, I mean, I knew I liked it. I knew I had worked hard on it. And it was a moment of feeling maybe a little physically sick that you're about to put all of
Mhm.
this work out into the world. But at the same time, it feels like a release to just let it reach whoever it needs to reach. And if someone needs to hear the words like I needed to write them, then I hope that it reaches them.
Yeah, yeah. So the collection actually journeys from heartbreak to rebirth. How do you hope readers will connect with this kind of transformation?
Well, I mean, heartache can feel agonizing, and it's such a universal part of the human experience. How it shows up in someone's life will inevitably be different, but at some time, we'll all likely experience heartache to some degree. And that's the main emphasis for me with this is it'll show up at some point in someone's life. So I'd hope that it helps put words and imagery to any pain someone's going through. And I mean, I find it helpful to know that you're not alone in those moments
Hmm.
where you kind of want the world to fade away just a little bit. And I think being vulnerable and exposing yourself can feel terrifying, but it's important at the same time because it opens the door for a more honest connection.
Absolutely. Yeah. And it is scary. I mean, obviously, but you're opening that door, so to speak, to let others know, hey, you're not the only one going through this. And, you know,
Exactly.
yeah, yeah, we all want to feel like, we're not the only one going through this horrible thing. And
Yeah,
yeah.
exactly.
Well, how does, of course, poetry uses a lot of imagery, and everyone will interpret the poem differently based on their own experiences. You
Mm.
use shadows, they play a significant role in your book. What do they represent for you?
So I use shadows as a way to characterize the things that we as humans run from. They're kind of a depiction of shame and like the things that we hide, the things that we might not want others to see, or that we're worried the world will judge us for, or we judge ourselves for, quite importantly, actually. But also, I think shadows are all about our blind spots as humans, because we all have them, no matter how good of people we are at our core. We all have stuff that maybe we make mistakes or isn't great. And I think that is such an important part of growth, or it has been for myself, in recognizing all parts of myself, that I have both good and bad,
Mhm.
and figuring out how to sit with them. It's almost like shadows for me were these things that like lingered right behind me and that I was carrying with me, whether I chose to see them or not. So that throughout the book, like depending on the chapter, the shadows show up in different ways and take on different entities. But yeah, it's kind of the blind spots that I needed to become aware of, if
Mhm.
that makes sense.
Mhm. Yeah, it's a perfect metaphor for sure. Talk about the writing a little bit. You talked about imagery and expressing these raw emotions, and how did that work with, crafting these vivid sensory experiences with raw emotion with an overall
Hmm.
polished verse?
Totally. So I have two parts to my process that really honors both of those things, and I don't exercise them at the same time.
Mm.
Crafting polished verse isn't something that I concern myself with at the beginning of my writing process. I really try to not steer my work in any direction when I'm in it. So I actually never sit down and just write. I more so like hear the poems, hear the words. The
Mm.
poems kind of come to me throughout my day or night, where I've literally been woken up at 2 a.m. and just start hearing a poem come through with that like rhythmic tone, and I just hear the words.
Oh, wow.
Um, yeah, so it kind of plays over and over for me until I write it down, and then I never edit them as I'm going through them. Like whatever is coming forward in that moment, the rawness of it, I write it without judgment. Sometimes I don't even understand what I'm saying in that moment. I'm just writing it down and then I leave it and come back to it whenever I feel pulled to come back. That could
Mhm.
be a day or honestly weeks or sometimes months, even like a year, where I come back to the poem and actually then look at it and I read it out loud to myself and can understand what they're trying to say and what words then can be changed to make it more polished or feel more rhythmic. Sometimes even like alter the meaning of it.
Yeah. As you were talking, it occurred to me that it's probably a lot different editing poetry than, say, a novel, because you don't necessarily want to change the meaning like you were talking about, like that raw emotion. That's the beauty.
Totally.
Um,
And that was what I found really interesting in the publishing process and the editing process. And I loved my editor. I thought she was great because she acknowledged the intention with poetry. And sometimes a grammatical error can be so intentional, and you can't change even the slightest word because it would alter the image that I'm trying to portray.
Right, right. That makes total sense. Yeah. What do the poems look like in your book? Do you have a specific technique that you lean toward, or were there any unconventional techniques you experimented with? What do the poems' stylistic choices look like?
Well, I mean, I think the like rhythmic tone to them is very much my style. That's how I feel connected to my work. The hearing of them would be more the technique. Like, I don't know if I necessarily have a technique that I would focus on, but style wise, I I mean, not all of my poems have that rhyme to them, but
Mm.
I do really find it's a visceral sensory experience for me.
Hmm.
It's more like allowing the words to come through me and feeling that rhythm within me as I'm reading them or writing them. So I try to give myself the space to just be open to how it comes and how I feel about, if I'm mid sentence, if I feel, okay, go to the next line, I'll listen to that and just allow it to be, and without judgment, just see what that does for it. So I guess style wise, it's really removing any self judgment, allowing for that rawness to come through and trusting the rhythm of how it sounds in my head.
Hmm. Hmm.
But it's all very sensory for me. I'm a very like right brain wired person. So sitting into that without judgment and without trying to assess what is going on, I think allows me to tap into that rhythmic kind of lyrical style that I have leaned towards.
Hmm. Yeah, that's your voice. That's
Yes.
who you are. Yeah, yeah. So, how do you balance like introspection with social reflection in your work?
Mm. It's not really something I set out to do from the beginning. I think
Hmm.
it's a very interconnected process. It's generally that I'll be looking at something within my own experience, and then that ripples out to a larger microscope of where these beliefs or ideas or emotions within me are come from. For example, if I'm interacting with a friend and I become aware of my own behavior and how that might be influencing the dynamic, and that is almost when a poem might come to me,
Mm.
but it's from more of a third party observing state where I'm watching myself and watching my friend and both of us as individuals and observing the undercurrents of what's happening.
Hmm.
So it becomes kind of a study of the conditioning that I've received and then the ecosystem at large that would influence me. And I feel typically drawn to the things that aren't said in a conversation, or the innuendo or the cause and effect of things.
Mm.
So I don't know if it's necessarily that I intentionally try to balance them, but it's more putting out what I observe. And as we were speaking about before, like, hey, does anyone else feel this? Do you
Hmm.
know what I mean? Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. And more people should probably take that approach with their relationships.
Well, it's taking me time to get there.
But that's another topic, yeah.
Yeah, yeah, exactly.
So how do you view the role of the poet in society, especially like during challenging times?
Poetry as a platform, there's something so powerful in using your voice in a disarming but profoundly soft and almost unmistakably honest way. So there's this writer that I really like. His name is Tom Robbins. And in some of his work, he emphasizes the necessity of the poet in society and how the poet can sweetly and succinctly and very softly express human nature in all its conflictions,
Mm.
because there can just be so much conflict and ego and asserting who's right and wrong and confusion. But really, beneath that, it's this baseline of we're all just beating hearts and human bodies. And I think the mind can trick us to thinking differently. So I feel that poetry is an important medium to artfully depict those masks and conditioning and the excessive intellectualization, and put words that pull us towards kind of the rawness of humans
Hmm.
so that
Hmm.
we can see each other.
Right. Right. You've talked a lot about the rawness, the deep emotion. Are there any lighter moments in the book?
Yes, totally. I think intermixed are moments of clarity and less confusion. And I wrote this in a way that I would typically write a script. So
Mm.
I kind of bring the audience in close in the beginning to experience the emotions with me, and then slowly open up the gaze. So, more towards the third and fourth and fifth chapters, it's like a relieving of this narrowness of what you're going through. And I think rawness can be quite light at the same time. Like, I don't see it as just a negative human experience of emotion. There's something so vulnerable and raw about experiencing joy. And that is really beautiful. And there are moments of that intermixed, and that rawness can quickly turn to whether you choose to sit in that joy or whether you get scared and think about all the reasons you shouldn't be feeling joy,
Yeah.
so that it doesn't hurt if you don't experience joy again. I think that is more how I see rawness of emotion, is the teetering of light and shadows. Both are necessary for the other to exist.
Yeah. Yeah. That makes total sense now. And I don't know why I
Oh no, it's so fine to
think,
ask. Like, so
you know,
fair.
yeah, but there is a lot of raw emotion and happiness and, you know,
Mm,
the birth of a new baby, falling in love, I mean, that's
yeah.
raw, but you don't think about when I hear
Well,
raw, I dwell towards the hard stuff.
yeah, yeah. I think like we as humans, because there is that element of vulnerability, I mean, it is kind of a choice to feel the excitement of that rawness, um,
Hmm.
because it can quickly be terrifying how great, falling in love is. Or I have not had a baby, but I'm sure that that would feel like so powerful and beautiful. And then you have this human to take care of. So that can also be terrifying. So it's like the teetering of excitement and terror that is beautiful in its own way.
Absolutely, yeah. Was there any part of the book or any chapter that was most challenging for you to articulate?
Yeah, I actually found the first and second chapters, like the more like heartache poems, were the most difficult for me to put into the book. Initially, I had like one version of the manuscript, and then I think it was the end of 2023 when I was already in the publishing process, where I was reading through the manuscript and had this moment of kind of being like, hold on, there are so many gaps in these two chapters, because
Mm.
I allude to sadness and heartache and things being confusing, but I don't actually expose that I'm sitting in it or what it feels like for me in that moment. And I think previously it had felt too vulnerable to let people see me in that state, to let anyone know that I had felt that sadness and that depth of pain.
Mhm.
So I actually went back into my notebooks, because I have so many. And then my notes app on my phone just is filled with poems always. And I found all this writing that I had done when I was really in it years ago. So I literally hadn't looked at them or edited them for years. And at that time, I was just too immersed in that ache that I couldn't have imagined anyone seeing that rawness. Like that was raw. So, from this standpoint, like a year later or a year ago now, I was
Mhm.
able to look at those words from a more observational, objective standpoint because there were so many that I was looking at them and just thought they were so raw and necessary to share. And so that really helped me evolve the first and second chapters to something that was more full, I guess, and more honest.
Mm-hmm. What kind of feedback have you had from readers?
Really lovely. It's such a nice experience to have people share their favorite poems with you or what resonates for them. It's great to see the variety of people reading it. I had like a 6 foot Irish male who never really would speak about his feelings, talk to me about how it felt and how it helped him put words to certain moments that he's experienced. So that,
Wow.
yeah, feels really, really lovely because it's just knowing that you're connected to someone you didn't expect to be connected to.
Yeah. That's awesome. That's amazing.
Mm,
Yeah.
yeah.
It keeps you going, huh?
Yeah. Yeah, it does feel great.
Yeah. Speaking of favorite poems, do you have a favorite poem in the collection? And would you mind reading it for us and sharing why it stands out for you?
Yeah. Yeah, I do. I mean, I have many throughout, but there's one that I think it's in the third or the fourth chapter where it's more like the self-reflection and it's probably a bit lighter, but anyway, I'll just read it.
Okay.
If I'm honest, if I'm really, truly honest, I'm scared to get older, scared of losing what we equate to youth, of losing what I equated to the cause of beauty. And I know it's a simple and superficial thought, but it's not so simple, or really that superficial, because it's honest and I'm scared.
Mm.
So that one I remember writing quite viscerally. And it was born from this moment where I was reading somewhere online some influencer talking about loving yourself and all that comes with aging and whatnot. And I remember sitting there thinking, it is, in fact, a really huge feat to really learn to love yourself and like sit with that process, not just saying it, but like actually feeling it. And I think I've experienced as a woman that yes, it's somewhat deemed superficial to care about how you look or how your youth is holding up.
Hmm.
But then there's so much pressure on women to maintain it and maintain the illusion of it. So the writing of this was kind of a sure, you can tell me I'm superficial for talking about this, but is it actually that superficial? Like, should I not care about it because I'm trying to express a very human fear right now? So, can we talk about that fear itself rather than dismissing it or pretending I shouldn't be feeling that. I should just love myself, you know? It was more like, can I sit with the discomfort of not rushing in to tell myself just to love myself? Because loving myself isn't the issue. It's wanting to talk honestly about not being freaked out by this topic and how it'll be accepted if I make that point, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah. I can see what you're saying about, some people thinking it is superficial, but it is a lot deeper than that. And, going through, I mean, I've been here for several decades. And, it's like every decade is new and every decade is great. But, then you look in the mirror and you're like, okay, that's me. That
Yeah.
what I see in the mirror isn't how I feel inside.
Yeah, I think that's exactly it, where it's like, yes, I love
Yeah.
how I'm aging and how I'm, existing in the world, but also this is kind of scary,
Yeah.
like just the process of it and, your body changes and just things that can get swept under the rug, that it's almost maybe a bit uncomfortable if you say honestly, like, I'm kind of terrified of this aging thing, you know?
Hmm. Yeah, that was a good one. That was a good choice. So what's next for you? Do you have any projects you can share with us?
I mean, I still write poetry all the time. Like I post it to my poetry Instagram account. I mean, I always have tons of poems in notebooks. Like I'm writing poems all day, every day. It's kind of a perpetual state of observation and just listening to what is coming up for me, because I do use poetry as that way to sift through thoughts and things. So I don't know if there's necessarily a direction. I don't know how I'll curate them into a story in the future, but because it is my work and I'm a screenwriter and a narrative developer, so I'm working on other client projects. I'm like writing a pilot right now for a Canadian client. So I'm constantly writing,
Hmm.
and there are constantly patterns coming up and things that I'm looking at. I'd say, yeah, a theme that I'm looking at are my patterns and understanding the ways that I do things and the importance of how we cope in different moments and why that worked for one time and why you don't want it to work anymore.
Mm.
Um, but no clear direction with where that's going. I kind of love exploring all the emotion that we can feel as a human. So, however that comes out, we'll see. But yeah, I kind of
Yeah,
just will let it unfold.
yeah, as it should be. I mean, there's no timeline. You don't have to write another book within, how many days or months or years, so
Totally. I mean,
or
I think
ever. Yeah.
I would like to. I enjoyed the process. Yeah, we'll see what format it takes.
Yeah. Well, Lauren, thank you so much for coming on the show and sharing so much about yourself and your work with us. I really enjoyed it.
Thank you so much for having me. It was truly a pleasure.
Thank you so much for joining me today for my interview with Lauren Gouin, author of Chasing Shadows. You can learn more about Lauren Gouin and her work at laurengouin.com. And be sure to check out our other interviews at InsideScoopLive.com.